I'm going to ask you one more time. Move to the rear of the aircraft or I will have you removed. This is ridiculous. I paid for this seat. I'm not asking. Move now or you will be removed.
Fine. You don't deserve to sit in this seat. This is my usual seat.
Excuse me, I was assigned this
She did
seat.
not shift
I
in
don't
her
care.
seat.
You need to move
She
now.
held a phone in her lap, and her hands were completely still, and she said, in a voice that was quieter than the flight attendant's, and somehow larger, "You have asked me 4 times. My answer has not changed." The flight attendant's name was Diane Strickland, 48 years old, senior cabin crew chief, 19 years with this airline, which meant she had seen every kind of difficult passenger there was, the entitled, the drunk, the grieving, the genuinely confused, and she had handled all of them. She had a practiced way of handling them. She had a practiced smile and a practiced firmness, and she had never, in 19 years, not prevailed. She was not prevailing. The woman in seat 1A was named Camara Osei-Bonsu, 44 years old. She was wearing a jacket custom-made in London. She was carrying one bag. She had boarded last, which Diane had noted, because the kind of woman Diane assumed her to be did not board last by choice. She boarded last because she had been held back, or because she had been slow, or because she did not belong in the seat she was walking toward and had hoped to slip into it before anyone noticed. That was what Diane had assumed. Diane was wrong in every particular. She did not know that yet. "Ma'am," Diane said. Her voice carried the controlled edge of a woman who has been told, by a voice on the phone that morning, that she needs to get this woman off this plane before it reaches Charlotte. "Your name is not on the manifest. I cannot allow you to remain in a seat that does not belong to you." "My name is on the confirmation I showed you when I boarded," Camara said, still not looking up. "The confirmation references this seat. My name was on this manifest at 6:41 this morning. It was removed at 6:42. I did not remove it. A beat. Someone did," Camara said, "and I don't think it was you." The cabin had gone very quiet. 3 things were happening simultaneously that Diane did not know about. The first was that a woman in 2B had her phone raised and was recording. The second was that a 26-year-old flight attendant named Tiffany Okafor was standing at the rear partition with her own phone at her side, camera facing forward, having started recording 11 minutes ago, when something about the way Diane had walked toward this seat had told her, "Document this." The third was that Camara Osei-Bonsu had, at 9:47 that morning 31 minutes ago, completed the transfer paperwork on the airline that employed Diane Strickland. The filing was recorded with the FAA. The acquisition was legal and done. Diane did not know any of these things. She knew one thing. A man named Gerald Pruitt had called her 3 weeks ago and offered her a sum of money and told her to make sure a specific woman did not land in Charlotte today. He had said it was a business matter. He had said it was simple. He had not said what the woman would be like when you tried to move her. "Miss Osei-Bonsu," Diane said, and now the warmth had left her voice entirely. Something else in its place. "This is the last time I am asking." Camara looked up. She looked at Diane Strickland for a long, steady moment. "No," she said. "It isn't." She was right about that. The last time was still coming. Neither of them knew, in that moment, what it would cost. This is the story of a 48-minute flight from Atlanta to Charlotte, of a woman who sat in her seat and did not move, of the man who paid someone to move her, and what happened when she didn't, of an old pilot who wrote a witness statement on an air sickness bag during descent, of a 26-year-old who decided, in the middle of someone else's emergency, what kind of professional she was going to be. It is also the story of a woman named Bessie Coleman, who went to France in 1920 because America would not teach her to fly, and who came back anyway, and who died at 34 in an aircraft that had not been properly maintained, and who never got to open the flight school she had spent her life planning to build. Stay with me. Camara had been boarding planes last for 22 years. That was intentional. Since the day a gate agent in Houston had held her back while 12 businessmen walked past her into a jetway. each one nodding at the agent like he'd done them a personal favor. She had been 22 years old. She had been wearing a suit that cost more than the agent's weekly paycheck. It had not mattered. She had learned, that day, something she never forgot. Getting on first means people watch you arrive. Getting on last means people watch you walk to your seat. One of those is power. The other is just being early. She had boarded at gate B14 in Hartsfield-Jackson that morning, slipping into the jetway as the boarding agent was already pulling the door. Her carry-on was one bag, small and black. She was going to seat 1, a first row, left window, bulkhead, because in October, the Blue Ridge Mountains came in over your left shoulder about 40 minutes out of Atlanta, and for a few minutes they were spectacular. She had sat in this seat many times. It was a seat she knew. What she had not known, boarding last, was that someone had spent the previous 4 hours deleting her from the plane. Not her body, her name, her reservation, her seat confirmation, her loyalty number, the digital record that said this woman belongs in this seat and is not to be moved. All of it, gone, at 6:42 in the morning, through a VPN that her assistant was already tracing. The person who had done this was the woman now standing in the aisle of first class with a clipboard and a practiced smile telling her to leave. Camara had shown Diane Strickland the confirmation. She had stated her case clearly, once, and then she had gone to seat 1A and sat down, because she was not leaving, and she had decided, in the moment she walked down the jetway, that the most powerful thing she could do was remain completely still and let Diane Strickland reveal exactly what this was. She had texted the diamond symbol in her contacts, her head of digital operations in Houston, and the message had said, "Someone deleted my reservation. Find out who." She had put the phone face down in her lap. She had waited. There was an old man in 2A who had not yet spoken. She had noticed him when she sat down. Big hands, grey beard, the stillness of a man who had learned over a long life how to be very quiet in rooms where things were happening. A pin on his lapel, old Delta wings, pre-2007 design. She had filed him away the way she filed everything, quickly, completely, without letting it show. Then her phone had buzzed. The message from the diamond symbol said, "Reservation deleted from the system at 6:42 a.m. IP Tatsing 24. IP address routed through a VPN tracing now Camara. Someone planned this. She had read it twice. She had looked up at the forward galley, where Diane Strickland was writing something on her clipboard. She had thought, "I know. I just need to know who you're working for." Then, a second buzz. A different number. Unknown. It said, "They know you're on this flight. Do not land in Charlotte." She had stared at that message for a long time. She had forwarded it to the diamond symbol. Then she had put the phone face down and she had breathed. The plane had begun to move. She had looked out the window at the Blue Ridge Mountains that were not yet visible, but would be in 40 minutes. She had thought about Bessie Coleman. She had thought, "I am still on this plane." She had thought, "Stay there." The flight time from Atlanta to Charlotte, on a good day, was 52 minutes. On a Tuesday in October with light tailwinds, it would be closer to 48. Camara had 48 minutes to figure out who had sent that message and what to do about it. 48 minutes inside a metal tube at 32,000 feet with a woman who had been paid to remove her from it. And she had one other thing. "You flew for Delta," she said. The old man in 2A looked over. 41 years, Marcus Webb said. "How did you know?" "Your hands. You hold them the way pilots do when they're sitting in a commercial seat, like you're waiting to be asked to do something useful." She looked at him. "And the pin on your lapel. That's the old Delta wings. Pre-2007 design." Marcus looked down at the pin. He had worn it every time he flew since retirement. A habit, the way some men wear rings they have stopped thinking about. "Sharp eyes," he said. "Necessary eyes." She offered her hand across the armrest. "Camara Osei-Bonsu." He shook it. the grip of a man who had climbed in and out of cockpits for 4 decades. Marcus Webb, are you going to tell me what's going on? Someone deleted my reservation from the manifest at 6:42 this morning. The flight attendant up front knows about it. I don't believe it was her idea originally. She said it the way she might have said, "The weather in Charlotte this afternoon is partly cloudy." I'm trying to figure out whose idea it was. Marcus was quiet for a moment. You're not angry, he said. Oh, I'm angry. I just can't be useful if I'm angry the way she wants me to be angry. He nodded. He looked at the back of Diane Strickland's head, where she was moving through the cabin checking seatbelts. He looked back at Camara. What do you need? You know these aircraft. Every narrow body in the domestic fleet. If this plane makes an unscheduled landing, it won't. Not for a passenger dispute. If it does, who gets called? He thought about it. Depends on the airport. Charlotte, it'd be airport security first, then TSA, if it escalates. The crew chief has authority to request a law enforcement meet at the gate. She can't do it arbitrarily. She needs documentation of a threat or a violation. She's going to manufacture one. He looked at her a long time. How sure are you? Someone sent me a message 40 minutes ago, telling me not to land in Charlotte. Someone else deleted my reservation. Those two things are connected. The woman up front is the tool. I'm trying to find out who's holding the handle. Marcus Webb had been flying since 1979. He had been stopped in jetways, talked down to, in operations offices, had his ID requested 3 times in one day at O'Hare in 1984 by people who could not believe that the man in the captain's uniform was the captain. He had delivered every passenger on every flight he had ever flown to their destination, and the airline had never once put his face in a recruitment brochure. He knew the shape of this. He had known it since seat 1A. Tell me what to watch for, he said. Watch her hands. When she's doing something she has rehearsed, she touches the clipboard twice before she speaks. I've seen her do it 3 times already. He looked at her. How long have you been watching her? He said. Since I sat down. He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. 41 years of flying, he said quietly, and I never met Bessie Coleman, but I think I know what she would have been like. Camara looked at him. She did not say anything. She did not need to. She turned back to her phone. The water arrived at the same time Diane Strickland did. Tiffany had brought a glass with ice to seat 1A. She was turning to go when Diane appeared from the galley direction, pushing the narrow first-class cart loaded with glasses and a full pitcher and 2 bottles of sparkling water. The cart was slightly too wide for the aisle at that particular angle, or it would have been too wide on purpose if someone had timed it that way. Diane rounded the cart. Her elbow caught the pitcher. The pitcher tipped. 22 ounces of ice water went sideways across the left armrest of seat 1A, across the sleeve of Camara's jacket, and into her lap. The gasp from 2B was instantaneous. Camara did not gasp. She looked down. She looked at the water spreading across the fabric of a jacket that had been custom-made in London and that she had worn for exactly 4 months. She looked up at Diane Strickland. Diane's expression was perfect, a woman mortified by her own clumsiness. Her hand was already up at her mouth. Her eyes were wide. I am so sorry, she said. I am so terribly sorry. Let me don't. Diane stopped. Camara's voice had not risen. Same register, but it had weight to it now. The kind of weight that comes from restraint that is not passive. Don't, Camara said again. You did that deliberately. The cabin went absolutely still. Ma'am, the cart is not too wide for this aisle. You have been rolling it for 19 years. Your elbow hit the pitcher at a specific angle that sent the water to the left. I was sitting to the left. You did that deliberately. The woman in 2B had her phone out. She was not hiding it. The man with the Wall Street Journal had put it down completely. Marcus Webb was watching Diane Strickland's hands. She had touched the clipboard twice before she walked up. Miss Osei-Bonsu, Diane said. The warmth in her voice was gone now, something colder in its place. I am trying to help you. I have been trying to help you resolve the situation with your seat since you boarded. You have been uncooperative and frankly hostile. Hostile, Camara said, and I am going to have to ask you, for the last time, to move to an available seat at the rear of this aircraft, or I will be forced to contact the U.S. Air Marshal. The U.S. Air Marshal line. That was new, not improvised. That was a move she had been briefed to make, a threat with specific legal weight. If a crew member reported an unruly passenger to a federal air marshal on a domestic flight, the aircraft could be diverted. A diverted aircraft did not land in Charlotte. A diverted aircraft landed somewhere else. Somewhere Camara's meeting could not be reached in 2 hours. Camara understood this exactly. She sat with it for 2 full seconds. Then she said, "What is his name?" What? The man who hired you. What is his name? The cabin was a held breath. Diane Strickland's face did something, just for a fraction, a flicker. The pupils of a person who has heard the one thing they were certain nobody in the room could know. She recovered fast. She was a professional. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said. "This is the last time I'm asking you, Gerald Pruitt." She said it the way you say something you've already confirmed. Not a question. A place marker. Diane's face went, for 1 full second, completely empty. Then it arranged itself back into control. "Almost. I need you to come with me," she said. "I'm not going anywhere. Still even. Still steady. But you should know that my assistant in Houston traced the VPN that accessed the airline's reservation system at 6:42 this morning. The trace will complete in approximately 12 minutes. If Gerald Pruitt's name comes back on that trace, and I believe it will, then what you are doing right now is not a labor dispute. It's obstruction of a corporate acquisition and potentially federal wire fraud." She let that land. She picked up Tiffany's water glass, the one that had survived intact, and she took a sip. "So," she said, "I would take a moment, if I were you, and think carefully about whether Gerald Pruitt is worth what comes next." Diane stood very still. Her clipboard was in both hands. She was not touching it twice. She was gripping it like a thing she was afraid to let go of. Then she turned and walked back to the galley. The Wall Street Journal man looked across at the woman in 2B. She looked at her phone, at the video she had just finished recording. Marcus Webb turned to Camara. "Gerald Pruitt," he said quietly. "Atlas Air Group. You know him. I know of him. He's been trying to acquire this Charlotte-Atlanta route for 3 years. If your meeting today is what I think it is, the acquisition closes today at 2 p.m. She looked at him. "If I'm not in that room, the deal terms revert to the original offer. His original offer, the one my board turned down 8 months ago. So he needs you off this plane. He needs me not in Charlotte." Marcus Webb sat back in his seat. "Lord," he said softly. Not profanity, and not quite prayer. The exhalation of a person who has seen too much to be surprised, but is still, sometimes, tired. "What can I do?" he said. "Just be a witness. Whatever happens in the next 20 minutes, be a witness. I can do that." He had been doing it his whole life. There was a silence. After Camara named him, Marcus Webb broke it. He did it quietly, carefully, the way a man breaks silence, who has learned that silence is sometimes structural. It is holding something up, and if you break it wrong, things fall. "I flew a charter for Gerald Pruitt once," he said. 12 years ago. Private jet, 3 passengers, Dallas to Teterboro. He did not acknowledge me when he boarded. He did not acknowledge me when we landed. He walked past me like I was a piece of furniture that had been inconveniently placed in his path. He looked at his hands. I have thought about that flight a number of times since I retired. I have wondered what he saw when he looked at me. I do not think he saw a person. He sees what he needs to see, Camara said. That's his limitation. It's also his mistake, because you are not what he thinks you are. I am exactly what he thinks I am. He just thought that meant he could move me. Marcus nodded slowly. Outside, the seatbelt sign came on. The plane was beginning its initial descent into Charlotte. The intercom chimed twice. Tiffany's voice came through, calm and professional, explaining the standard arrival information, and her voice did not waver even slightly, and Camara thought, That is a person who has decided what kind of professional they want to be today, on this flight, in this situation, and they have decided correctly. My daughter flies, Marcus said. She's 34. She flies for a regional carrier out of Houston. She has been flying for 8 years. She is a better pilot than I was at her age. He paused. She has been called the wrong name in her cockpit 3 times by ground crew who assumed she was the first officer, twice by passengers who could not reconcile the uniform with the person wearing it. What does she do when that happens? She says her name, clearly, once. Then she does her job. He looked at Camara. She learned that from me. I learned it from the men who flew before me at Tuskegee. They flew combat sorties in 1,943 inches aircraft that were not as good as the ones they deserved. They flew anyway. They delivered every bomber they were assigned to escort. Not one was lost to enemy fire. The Air Force said that was coincidence. It was not coincidence. He paused. Greatness, in the face of obstruction, is a tradition my people have been building since before this country knew what to call it. Camara was quiet for a moment. When my grandmother was young, she said, she told me that the word for what black women have been doing in America for 3 centuries is not resilience. She said resilience means bouncing back. She said what we do is not bouncing back. She said we go forward, through the thing, carrying it if we have to. She said there is no word in English for that. She said in her twee, there was one, but it didn't translate. What was the word? She said it translated approximately as walking with the weight, as if it is yours, and it always was. Camara looked back at her phone. I think about that sometimes when people say I'm calm. You are calm. I have the weight. I'm just not putting it down in public. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned forward again and opened the air sickness bag in the seat pocket in front of him. He took out a pen. He began to write. What are you doing? Camara said. Writing down what I saw. Date, time, flight number, what happened, what was said, in what order. He wrote, without looking up. You said, be a witness. I'm writing it down so I don't misremember anything later. She watched him write. She thought, 41 years. She thought, every person delivered. She thought, I know what tradition I am in. Diane Strickland was in the galley for 6 minutes. Camara knew because she counted. In 6 minutes, a person following instructions can do 2 things. They can call the person who gave the instructions and ask what to do next, or they can make a decision on their own. Diane did both. Camara could not hear the call. She could see the tension in Diane's back through the partition gap. She could see the way Diane's shoulders changed when the call ended, not relieved, tighter. The shoulders of someone who has been given an instruction they did not want and has decided to follow it anyway. She came back out into the aisle. She had left the clipboard in the galley. That was when Camara knew the next part was going to be different. Miss Osei-Bonsu. Yes, Diane's voice had dropped. Very steady, very quiet. The voice of a woman who has decided the performance is over. You are going to move to the back of this aircraft. You are going to move because I am going to tell the air marshal that you made a physical threat against me. And when this plane lands, wherever it lands, you will be removed by law enforcement. And then you will spend the next 4 to 6 hours in an airport security office while you're meeting in Charlotte. She glanced away and back. And in that glance, Camara saw it concludes without you. The mention of Charlotte. Diane hadn't been told about Charlotte. Not in any public way. Not from anything on Camara's boarding pass or loyalty profile. Charlotte was the destination of the flight, yes. But the meeting in Charlotte, the specific 2 p.m. meeting on the 17th floor on South Tryon Street, Diane Strickland, had no reason to know about that, unless someone had briefed her. Unless Gerald Pruitt had briefed her. It was the slip, the small one, the kind that happens when a person is under enough pressure that they forget what they are supposed to not know. Camara stored it. She did not react to it. I haven't made any physical threat, she said. You will have, if I say you did. The cabin was completely silent. Marcus Webb had stopped breathing. The woman in 2B had her phone raised. She was not hiding it now. 3 rows back, Tiffany Okafor was standing near the rear partition, phone at her side, camera facing forward. She had been recording for 11 minutes. She had started when the water was spilled. She had not stopped. Camara looked at Diane Strickland. She thought about Bessie Coleman standing in front of an American flight school in 1920, being told no, over and over. Being told no so many times, she had gotten on a ship and crossed an ocean to find a country that would let her learn what she had come to learn. And then she had come back anyway. Diane, Camara said. Just the name. Don't do this. Something moved behind Diane's eyes. For 1/2 second, Camara thought she might have reached it, the part of a person that knows the difference between what they are doing and who they are. She hadn't. Diane's hand came up. It was not theatrical. It was short, sharp, sideways. The kind of movement that looks in the moment, like it might be something else. A gesture, an argument, and it takes a second to understand what the sound means. The sound was a snap. It moved through the cabin like a crack in ice. Camara's head turned to the right. Her hand came up slowly and rested against her cheek. She did not make a sound. The woman in 2B said, "Oh my God," out loud, and nobody turned to look at her. Marcus Webb said nothing. His hands were flat on the armrests. Tiffany Okafor, in the back, had caught it all. Camara turned her head back forward. She looked at Diane Strickland. Diane was breathing hard. The strike had surprised even her. The calculation had gotten away from her. In the galley, the person on the phone had said, "Do whatever is necessary." She had believed that to mean something more controlled, more deniable. She had not believed it to mean this. "You just assaulted a passenger," Camara said. Her voice was completely steady. "On a commercial aircraft. With 14 witnesses. 14. She knew exactly how many people were in the first-class cabin. Diane's mouth moved. Nothing came out. "Tiffany," Camara said. A pause. "Yes, ma'am. Did you get that?" A longer pause. Then, "Yes, ma'am. All of it. From the water." Diane wheeled around. Tiffany was 10 feet away, phone in hand, face composed. She was 26 years old. She was afraid. She was not going to let that be visible. "You," Diane started. "She works for me," Camara said. The cabin heard it. "She works for me," Camara said again. Not louder, more certain. This aircraft and the airline that operates it were acquired by Osei Holdings as of 9:47 this morning. The documentation is filed. The transfer is recorded with the FAA. This cabin, this aircraft, and this crew are employees of a company I own. Tiffany has every right to document what is happening on this plane. She reached for her phone. She called Charlotte. Not the meeting. Not her assistant. She called the airline's own ground operations in Charlotte, whose direct line was in her contacts, because she had added it in September when the acquisition paperwork began, because she had known not this specifically, but something like this was possible. You do not acquire a company without knowing where its pressure points are. "This is Camara Osei-Bonsu," she said. "I need a security meet at the gate when Flight 1847 lands. I am the acquiring principal for Osei Holdings. I have a crew member who has assaulted a passenger on tape. I also need legal on standby. We have a situation." She put the phone down. Diane Strickland stood in the middle of the first-class aisle of a plane she had just been told was no longer operated by her employer as of this morning. The Wall Street Journal man said, very quietly, to no one in particular, "Well," he said it the way men say that word when the sentence required is too large, and they have chosen the small one. Diane walked back to the galley. She did not come back out. The last 17 minutes of the flight were very quiet. Tiffany took over the first-class service. She moved with the efficiency of someone who had decided that the way to handle an extraordinary situation was to make the ordinary parts work correctly. She offered warm nuts. She refilled water. She did not speak about what had happened except once, when she passed Marcus Webb, and he said, very low, "You did good, daughter." Tiffany looked at him. "Thank you, sir," she said. He nodded once. She moved on. In the galley, Diane Strickland sent one text message. It went to a number she had been told to delete after use, and had not deleted because she was afraid. The message said, "It didn't work. She knows your name. I'm sorry." The reply came in 30 seconds. The reply said, "You were never part of this. I don't know you." Diane stared at that message for the rest of the flight. It is a particular kind of education, the moment when you understand that the person who used you has already planned for the moment when you become a liability. Gerald Pruitt had spent 3 years acquiring companies. The companies he acquired had all had, in common, one thing: a person who had been convinced that loyalty was a two-way street, and who had discovered, at the moment of most exposure, that it was not. Diane had watched other people learn this lesson. It looked different from the inside. From the outside, it had always seemed like weakness, a failure of character, people who had made their beds. From the inside, it felt like the floor had gone somewhere else. She put the phone in her apron pocket. She thought about Gerald Pruitt, saying, "Just make sure she doesn't land." She thought about how that had sounded like a simple instruction, an inconvenience she was being paid to create. She had not asked what the alternative was for Camara Osei-Bonsu if she didn't land. She had not asked because it was easier not to. She had been doing that her whole career, not asking the questions with hard answers. Outside, the Carolinas came in below. Green hills, brown-edged with October. The Blue Ridge Mountains were to the left, their ridgelines faint and enormous. In seat 1A, Camara pressed her forehead against the window. She was looking at the mountains. She was thinking, "I am still on this plane." She was thinking, "Bessie Coleman went to France." She was thinking, "I didn't have to." She said it the way you say something you've already confirmed. Not a question, a place marker. Diane's face went, for one full second, completely empty. Her hands were at her sides. The practiced composure, 19 years of it, simply left her face. What was underneath was smaller than the composure. The face of someone who has been certain they were invisible, and who has just understood they were not. She recovered. Fast. She was a professional. "I need you to come with me," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." Camara's voice was still even. "But you should understand that the mention of Charlotte, which you just made, is not something you should have known about. You knew I had a meeting there. Gerald Pruitt told you, which means Gerald Pruitt knew the specific purpose of this flight, which is information that was not public, which means he has been monitoring my activities." She paused. "Mr. Ruiz is going to be very interested in that detail. So are the federal investigators." Diane said nothing. "That detail," Camara said, "is the difference between a civil matter and a criminal one. I want you to sit with that." A long silence. "Whatever he paid you," Camara said quietly, "was it enough for a federal record?" She did not say it cruelly. She said it the way you say a true thing to a person who has not yet absorbed the true thing, with patience, with the particular steadiness of someone who has already decided the outcome and is now waiting for the other person to arrive at it. Diane did not answer. Diane went back to the galley for the last time. The passengers who had been watching did not look away. The woman in 2B lowered her phone by an inch and then raised it again. The Wall Street Journal man had laid the paper entirely flat on the pull-down tray and had his arms crossed over his chest in the manner of a man who has seen something he intends to remember. The couple in 4A and 4B, who had boarded with the settled air of people who are not interested in other people's problems, were now very interested in this problem. The woman in 4A leaned forward with her elbows on her knees. The man in 4B had his eyes on Diane Strickland, with the expression of someone running a calculation. Marcus Webb was still. He had been still since the snap. His hands were flat on his armrests. His face was careful. He had a look Camara had seen once before, in a photograph one of the Tuskegee airmen, Robert Friend, photographed after the war in his uniform, receiving a decoration he should have received years earlier. He had the expression of a man who has decided that the appropriate response to an outrage is to be completely quiet and completely present and to not look away. That was the expression on Marcus Webb's face. He was memorizing. Later, on the air sickness bag, he would write, at approximately 9:38 a.m., Flight 1847, Atlanta to Charlotte. The senior flight attendant, identified as Diane Strickland, struck the female passenger in seat 1A with an open-handed motion to the right side of her face. The sound was clearly audible. The passenger did not cry out. She placed her hand against her cheek. She said, "You just assaulted a passenger on a commercial aircraft with 14 witnesses." The flight attendant did not respond to this. "I am a retired commercial airline pilot, Delta Airlines, 1979 to 2020. I have never in 41 years witnessed a crew member strike a passenger. This is my voluntary statement." He wrote it in the careful handwriting of a man who had spent 40 years writing maintenance logs and flight reports and had learned that clarity is the most important quality in documentation. Every letter formed, every word complete. He folded the bag. He put it in his breast pocket. He looked at the ceiling of the aircraft for a moment. He thought about a thing his father had told him in 1975, when Marcus had come home from his first attempt at a commercial pilot's application, and the rejection letter was in his hand. His father had been a Pullman porter on the Southern Pacific for 30 years. His father had said, "Son, the work is the answer. You fly. You fly every flight. You fly them all right, and you fly them all safe. And you don't let any of it stop you from doing the work, because the work is what they cannot take from you, even when they try to take everything else." His father had been right. He had been right about that his whole life. Marcus put his hand over the breast pocket where the air sickness bag was. He thought, "I have one more piece of work to do today." The plane landed in Charlotte at 9:53 a.m., not diverted, not delayed, 11 minutes ahead of schedule, because the tailwind had been better than forecast, and the air traffic control lane had been clear. Camara had spent the last 12 minutes in a state of controlled stillness that Marcus Webb would later describe to his daughter on the phone that evening as the stillest person I have ever seen on an aircraft, and I spent 41 years in the sky. She had answered 3 texts. She had read 2 documents. She had looked out the window at the mountains, and she had thought about the meeting, and she had thought about 46 people in Houston, and she had thought about a dead woman from Atlanta who had gone to France. She had not thought about Diane Strickland. There was nothing left to think about. The jetway attached. The door opened. 2 people walked in before passengers were cleared to deplane. One was a woman in a dark blazer with an airport security badge on a lanyard. The other was a man in a suit that Camara recognized, Charlotte-based counsel for Osei Holdings, whom she had called from the air. Behind them, in the jetway, were 2 Charlotte Douglas airport officers. Camara stood. She took her carry-on from the overhead. She straightened her jacket. The wet sleeve had dried during the flight, but the fabric had a stain that was going to require a professional, and she noted this the way she noted most inconveniences, catalogued and set aside. She looked at Diane Strickland, who was standing at the forward galley door. Diane was very still. "Miss Strickland," said the woman from security, "we've been asked to speak with you regarding an incident on this flight." Diane did not answer. "Ma'am, I need you to step to the side with me." Diane looked at Camara. In 19 years as a flight attendant and 6 as crew chief, Diane Strickland had maintained a particular self-image. Someone who kept order, who knew how things were supposed to work, who had standards. She had told herself that. She had believed it the way people believe, the things they need to believe to keep doing what they're doing. She looked at Camara, and for the first time she looked at her full in the face, not as an obstacle, not as a problem, as a person. She saw a woman with a faint mark on her cheek that was going to darken to a bruise by evening. She saw the woman who had said, "Don't do this." She had not listened. "I'm sorry," Diane said. The words came out like something she had been holding and had finally dropped. Camara looked at her for a moment. "I know," she said. It was not forgiveness. It was not cruelty either. It was the plain truth of a person who has been in the room when someone understands. Too late. the full weight of what they chose. What happens to her is not up to me, Camara said to the security officer. She physically assaulted a passenger. There are 14 witnesses and video documentation. The decision about charges belongs to the authorities and to the airline, which is now under my ownership. She picked up her bag. I have a meeting to get to. She walked off the plane. The conference room on the 17th floor of the building on South Tryon Street had a view of the uptown skyline and a long table with 12 chairs. 9 of them were occupied by the time Camara walked in at 11:47 a.m. Her arrival had been pushed by an hour due to the situation on the flight, and the legal team had extended the window. Gerald Pruitt was not in the room. Gerald Pruitt had, apparently, been in the room until 11:15, at which point he had received a phone call and left quietly. He had not come back. The man who told her this was the opposing team's lead counsel, a Houston attorney named Everett Gaines, who delivered the information with the visible discomfort of a person who knows the other side of the table is going to ask questions he cannot fully answer. "Where is Mr. Pruitt?" Camara said. "I've been unable to reach him since he left." Camara sat down. She opened her bag. She pulled out the document that had been 11 months in preparation. She set it on the table. "Mr. Gaines," she said, "I'm going to walk you through what happened this morning." She walked him through it. It took 22 minutes. She had the VPN trace documentation, which her assistant had completed while the plane was still in the air, and which traced to a device registered to Atlas Air Group's IT department. She had Tiffany Okafor's recording. She had a written statement from Marcus Webb, who had produced it by hand on an air sickness bag during descent. She had photographed it with her phone. She had her own record of the anonymous warning message and documentation of the reservation deletion, time-stamped. Gerald Pruitt had, in attempting to prevent an acquisition, created the documentation trail that would be used to investigate him for wire fraud, corporate espionage, and through his instruction to Diane Strickland, to do whatever was necessary potential conspiracy to commit assault. The legal theory was not hers to argue. That was for prosecutors, but she laid it on the table like every other document, in order, with the precision of a woman who had spent 22 years building things that were hard to knock down. The room was very quiet when she finished. "Mr. Gaines," she said, "the acquisition moves forward. The terms in front of me, the timeline I proposed in January. And I would suggest that whoever in your organization has been in communication with Gerald Pruitt this morning, speak to their own counsel before noon." Everett Gaines looked at his watch. It was 11:51. He looked at the woman across the table. "Yes," he said, "I think that would be appropriate." The acquisition closed at 1:17 p.m., 43 minutes ahead of the original window. Camara signed the documents. The room watched. She did not perform anything. She just signed, steadily, and the pen made the small sound a pen makes on heavy paper, and it was done. The airline had a new owner. Technically, it had had a new owner since 9:47 that morning, when the preliminary transfer was recorded. But the signing was the thing you could point to, the moment in the room. She put the pen down. She thought about 46 people in Houston. She thought, okay. She thought about Bessie Coleman not as a prayer this time, not as a compass check, like a greeting, the way you think of someone when you have done a thing they would have liked to see. Then she thought about Marcus Webb, and she pulled out her phone. In the elevator going up to the 17th floor, Camara's phone buzzed one more time, the diamond symbol. The message said, "The trace is complete. The VPN resolves to a device registered to Atlas Air Group IT. We have the MAC address and the session log." The deletion was not a system error. It was a manual operation. "Do you want us to send this to the Federal Aviation Authority or wait for your direction?" she replied. "Send it now." She put the phone away. The elevator doors opened. She thought briefly about the morning, about the gate agent at B14, about the seat, about Diane Strickland's face when she said Gerald Pruitt's name, that half-second of emptiness before the recovery, about Marcus Webb writing on an air sickness bag, about Tiffany standing 10 feet away with a phone, afraid and steady. She thought about what it had taken, all of it, The degree from Georgetown, the 11 months of paperwork, the years of learning how to be the calmest person in a room she had every right to be furious in. The way her grandmother had described it, walking with the weight as if it is yours, and it always was. She had been carrying it a long time. She walked into the conference room. She set her bag down. She sat at the table, and she thought, Bessie Coleman went to France. And then she picked up her pen. She thought about 46 people in Houston, and she thought about the air sickness bag Marcus Webb had filled with his careful handwriting, and she thought about Tiffany Okafor standing 10 feet from a woman who had just committed a federal crime, holding her phone steady, afraid and not showing it. She thought about all the witnesses, all the people who had decided, on a Tuesday morning on a flight they had simply been trying to take, to pay attention, to hold still, to not look away. You could not do anything without witnesses. That was something people forgot. They thought power was individual. It was not. It was always witnessed. The Tuskegee Airmen had flown 1,500 combat missions, and no one had put their names in a brochure for 30 years. And when the history was finally written, it was written because people had borne witness and remembered and refused to let it dissolve into the general noise. Witnesses were the whole thing. She thought, I have good ones. She picked up the pen. Marcus Webb was still at the airport when she called. He had been waiting in the ticketing hall on the main level for reasons he did not fully articulate to himself. He told himself he was checking his connection. The truth was that he had not been willing to leave until he knew. He answered on the second ring. Mr. Webb, Miss Osei-Bonsu. A pause. How did it go? It's done. The acquisition is closed. He let out a breath, long, the kind of breath that sounds like it has been held since Atlanta. Good, he said. Good. I wanted to thank you. I didn't do anything. You were a witness. I asked you to be a witness, and you were. She was quiet for a moment. That's not nothing. That has never been nothing. He didn't answer right away. She heard him shift in his chair, the sounds of the terminal moving around him, announcements, rolling luggage, a child somewhere nearby, laughing at something and then stopping. 41 years, he said. I flew 41 years, and I never told a single passenger what I did for a living, unless they asked. Most people don't ask. They see an old black man in economy, and they don't ask. I asked. You did. He made a sound that might have been a laugh. You know, the first black person in the world to hold an international pilot's license was a woman from Atlanta, Texas, Bessie Coleman, 1892. She had to go to France because America wouldn't teach her. She performed aerobatics in front of thousands of people and refused to fly at segregated air shows. She died at 34 in an aircraft that hadn't been properly maintained. He paused. Nobody put her face on anything for 50 years. I know. The men who trained at Tuskegee in 1941 had to fight 2 years just to be allowed to fly in combat. And then they flew combat. And then they came home and the airline said there was no demand for black pilots. His voice was very even. Delta hired me in 1979 because a federal judge told them they had to. The first few years, passengers would see me come into the cockpit and ask to be moved. Gate agents would have to explain that the captain was the captain. Camara listened. I never left anyone in a seat, Marcus said. Every flight I ever flew, I delivered every person in my aircraft to their destination. That was my answer to all of it. Every time. For 41 years. A pause. What you did today was your answer. She thought about that for a moment. Mr. Webb, she said, I'm funding a scholarship, the Bessie Coleman Scholarship, for black women in aviation. I'm announcing it at a press event in 3 weeks in Charlotte. I would like you there, if you're willing. A long pause. I'm old, he said, and I don't like press events. I know. I'll be there, he said. The press event was 3 weeks later at a hangar at Charlotte Douglas on a Tuesday morning. The weather was clear. The Blue Ridge Mountains were visible to the northwest. The light was the particular golden light of early November, the kind that makes everything look like a photograph of itself. Marcus Webb stood at the back of the room in his suit, with the old Delta Wings pin on the lapel, and watched Camara Osei-Bonsu stand at a podium in front of 60 journalists and 24 aviation students and explain what the Bessie Coleman Scholarship was, what it would fund, who it was for, and why it had been named for a woman who had died in 1926 before she could open the school she had spent her life planning to build. She spoke for 8 minutes. She did not read from notes. When she was done, a student in the front row, a girl of about 19, with the stillness of someone who does not yet know how far she is going to go, raised her hand. "How did you know you could do it?" the girl asked. "The acquisition. When people were trying to stop you. How did you know?" Camara looked at her. She thought about a text message that said, "Do not land in Charlotte." She thought about a wet jacket sleeve. She thought about what it feels like to sit in your own seat, on your own plane, and be told you do not belong in it. She thought about a woman who had gone to France. "I didn't always know," she said, "but I knew someone had done it first. And that was enough." In the back of the room, Marcus Webb straightened slightly. Nobody was looking at him. That was fine. He had spent 41 years being the person nobody was looking at, and the thing had gotten done anyway. That was enough. Tiffany Okafor got a call 2 weeks after the flight. The new HR director at the airline, now an Osei Holdings subsidiary, called to say that effective immediately, Tiffany's position had been reclassified as Senior Cabin Operations Specialist, corresponding increase in pay, a direct reporting line to the new Director of In-Flight Services. It also said that Miss Osei-Bonsu had noted in her incident report that Tiffany had demonstrated exemplary judgment and that this should be reflected in her permanent file. Tiffany sat in her apartment in Charlotte for a long time after that call. She had kept that small notebook since her first week. She had written in it things like, "Always confirm the manifest before boarding. Passengers in distress respond to calm, not volume. Know when something is wrong and say so." She added one more line that evening. She wrote, "Bearing witness is not passive. It is the most active thing sometimes." She closed the notebook. She went to make dinner. She thought, briefly, about an old man in 2A, with a pin on his lapel and big quiet hands. She thought about the way he had said, "You did good, daughter." She thought she would remember that for a long time. She was right about that. Gerald Pruitt hired 3 lawyers in the first week. The federal inquiry into the reservation system breach was opened within 10 days of the flight. The wire fraud investigation followed. 3 employees of Atlas Air Group cooperated with investigators in exchange for reduced exposure. Gerald Pruitt maintained, through counsel, that he had been engaged in normal, competitive activity, and that any connection between Atlas Air Group's IT systems and the Osei Holdings reservation platform was coincidental. The federal investigators had the VPN trace documentation, the time-stamped records, and Diane Strickland's text message exchange, turned over in full by Diane, whose own lawyer had explained that cooperation was her best option. Diane had been charged with assault. The charge carried additional weight under federal aviation statutes. She pled no contest. 6 months of supervised probation and a fine. She lost her flight attendant certification. She did not speak publicly about Gerald Pruitt, but she had thought about him in the months after the flight. A slow reckoning, the kind that comes when you sit alone long enough to hear your own thinking clearly. She had taken money to hurt a stranger. She had told herself it was a business problem, a corporate matter she was only adjacent to. She had told herself the stranger would be inconvenienced, not hurt. She had not asked the question, with the hard answer, because she had known, if she were honest, what the answer would be. She had not been honest. She was being honest now. It was, she thought, a very expensive education. Gerald Pruitt eventually settled with the Department of Justice for a sum that required liquidating a significant portion of his personal holdings. He issued a statement through counsel that used the word unfortunate 4 times and never used the word wrong at all. His company's bid to expand into the Charlotte-Atlanta corridor was permanently withdrawn. The acquisition proceeded without further incident. On a Wednesday morning in November, 3 months after the flight, Camara Osei-Bonsu sat in the forward seat of a refurbished aircraft at the Charlotte hub, seat 1A, her seat. The light came in through the window at the angle she liked. She was reading the incident report one last time before it was filed and archived. There was a line in it, a line from the final statement of the passenger in 2B, the woman with the silk scarf that she had read 3 times. The line said, "I didn't understand at first why she just sat there so calmly. I thought she was afraid. Then I realized she wasn't afraid at all. She just knew something the rest of us didn't." Camara set the report down. She looked out the window. The mountains were there, blue and enormous on the western horizon. They had been there the entire time. She had not always been able to see them. That was not the same as them not being there. She thought about what she knew. She knew that Bessie Coleman had gone to France in 1920 because America would not teach her to fly, and had come back and flown anyway, and had died young in a bad aircraft, and had never built the school of pilots she had planned to build. She knew that Tuskegee airmen had fought for the right to be allowed to fight, and had come home, and had flown commercially for 40 years without anyone putting their faces in a brochure. She knew that Marcus Webb had delivered every passenger in his aircraft to their destination for 41 years, in silence, without acknowledgement. She knew that people spent enormous energy deciding who belonged where. She knew that she had sat in her own seat. She turned back to the window. The Blue Ridge Mountains were doing what they always did in November, holding still, enormous and unhurried, completely indifferent to what was happening below them. She liked that about them. She thought, "I am still on this plane." She thought, "Good, okay, let me step back before you close this out. This is fiction. Camara is not real. Diane is not real. Marcus Webb is not real. Osei Holdings and Atlas Air Group are not real. Gerald Pruitt is not real, though the type of man he represents is common enough that his lawyers would be busy. A few things in this story that are real, though. Bessie Coleman is real. She was born in Atlanta, Texas, in 1892. She was black and Native American, the 10th of 13 children, and she picked cotton as a child to help her family survive. She moved to Chicago at 18, became a manicurist, read about aviation in newspapers, and decided she wanted to fly. Every American flight school she applied to turned her away. Some told her they did not accept women. Some told her they did not accept black applicants. Most told her both. She taught herself enough French to apply to the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale, earned her international pilot's license in 1921, and became the first black person and first Native American to hold one. She came back to the United States. She performed air shows and barnstormed. She refused to perform at segregated venues. She planned to open a flight school for black pilots. She died on the 30th of April 1926, at 34 years old, when the aircraft she was a passenger in went into an uncontrolled roll, and she was thrown from an open cockpit at 3,000 feet. The aircraft had a mechanical defect that a pre-flight inspection would have caught. There is a street named after her in Chicago. There is a postage stamp. She deserves more than both of those things. The Tuskegee Airmen are also real. They were the first black military pilots in the United States Armed Forces, trained in Tuskegee, Alabama, beginning in 1941. The U.S. military resisted their training and deployment on the basis of documented beliefs written into military policy that black men did not have the intelligence or nerve for combat aviation. They flew 15,000 sorties and 1,578 combat missions in World War II. They never lost a bomber. They were assigned to escort to enemy fire. They came home to a country that would not hire them to fly commercially for another 30 years. The National Museum of the Tuskegee Airmen is in Detroit, Michigan. It is worth your time. The commercial aviation consent decrees of the 1970s are also real. The first black commercial pilots for major U.S. carriers were hired under federal pressure and consent agreements following civil rights litigation. They flew. They delivered passengers. They retired. Most people do not know their names. What is not real, but what I wanted to say something about. Diane Strickland is a villain, but not a simple one. She took money to hurt a stranger and did things she cannot take back. She is also a person who was used by someone with more power and less conscience, and who found herself abandoned at the moment of most exposure. Both things are true. I did not let her off the hook. I also did not let her be nothing but a monster, because people who are only monsters are easier to ignore than people who are recognizable. The frightening thing about Diane is not that she is incomprehensible. It is that the pattern of decisions she made, not asking the hard question, telling herself it wasn't really her problem, taking a sum of money to smooth over a discomfort about what she was being asked to do, that pattern is not rare. That does not make what she did acceptable. It makes it human. Human is more frightening than simple. Camara is calm throughout this story. She does not break. Some people will find that unsatisfying. Where is the moment she lets herself feel it? The answer is that the feeling goes somewhere else, into the way she looks at mountains, into the name of a scholarship, into the 3 seconds she spends at a window before she picks up a pen. If you have ever had to be the calmest person in a room, you had every right to be furious in. You know what that costs. You know what is underneath it. This story is for you. So is the mountain at the end, not as a reward, just as a fact. The mountains do not care what is happening inside the plain. They are there regardless. Sometimes, that is the most reassuring thing there is. Thank you for staying with this one. If something hits you, a line, a moment, a person in your own life who came to mind while you were watching, leave it in the comments. I read everyone, every single one. Take care out there. The world asks a lot of some people. You already know which people.